All right, welcome back everybody. This is part one of our Firebase and N8N integration. We went over the intro previously, and here we're going to actually talk about the client setup with reCAPTCHA and attestation. And if we look at that kind of from a perspective of integration with Firebase and N8N, really what we're going to be looking at here is the development of the actual web page, the integration with reCAPTCHA, which gives us our attestation service, and then integrating all of that within AppCheck within Firebase. Now, what does this really do for us? And what we're looking at here is what this is allowing us to do is securely call our backend Firebase functions from our web page, right? Our web page, in this case, obviously, we're looking at it being hosted on Firebase as well. But from there, when we are executing our Firebase functions, we have a high confidence that the request coming in was made from a legitimate source. What do I mean by legitimate source? Well, your mobile apps, they have an identifier. Your web pages, they have a given URL, right? And we configure that with the attestation server, in this case, reCAPTCHA. And that allows us, when we call into the Firebase function, the Firebase function says, okay, well, I know that the AppCheck of the Firebase infrastructure verified that this is coming from either a app or mobile app that I've already kind of given the green light to, or a given URL that I've already pretty much, whitelisted to make requests into the server side infrastructure. So there, it protects your resources, right? It protects them from someone just bombarding your cloud resources and jacking up your bill to who knows what, or any number of resource kind of constrictions from a DDoS, something like that. Here, when we're talking about the benefits, it's not just just the trust, but it's the resilience of the client server communication. So when you do start going into your N8N infrastructure, you know that the calls are coming in and they were all produced from a client that's very trustworthy, right? So you never just want to go client directly to your N8N. That's almost the surefire recipe of getting your N8N infrastructure breached. So that's why we're looking at it from this perspective of a secured client server communication. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the actual practical components of that. Okay, so here we are looking at the Firebase console, right? This is just my demo project that you can see up here. And all that I have done so far is I've just set up hosting. Again, this is not app hosting. This is just regular, good old, web hosting. You can see that I've got the actual first deployment up, right? So here, when I click on that, all we have is a simple form, right? It's going to take your name, your email, and a message. And on this client, there's nothing verified at all, right? We're going to take care of all verification on the back end, right? So that means no scripting tags, valid emails, whatever. We'll do that on the back end if we're going to really worry about that too terribly much here at all. But this is just as plain as you can possibly get it. Again, all I've done is I've set up my Firebase, set up hosting, and then the other thing is I have set up the Blaze plan. So it's payment because we're going to have to put in functions. I haven't set up the functions yet, so we'll get into that here in just a moment. But I did want to show you the Firebase project that we're starting off with, okay? Okay, so the only thing that we need to do now is actually set up our functions. We're going to do this from the CLI. Pretty straightforward. I'm in a pretty much just an empty directory, right? And this is where I'm going to allow the whole functions, everything, the project to get set up. But it is going to be inside a empty directory. And from here, pretty straightforward. All you need to do is Firebase init functions, if I can spell it right. And now everything's pretty much going to kickstart, pretty much take care of everything. You got to just fill out a couple of questions, right? So we're going to use our existing project. Again, if you want to create your own, go for it. Here, going to kind of let this run through, and we're going to actually select the project that we want to make certain that we're actually paying attention to, right? So when we do a Firebase deploy, this will go up, right? So now pretty much everything runs through. I'm going to use TypeScript, and I'm definitely going to want the ESLint, as well as letting the build script pretty much install all the dependencies that I need at this time, right? And this is just going to run through really quick. All right, so once everything's complete, we'll just take a look really quick. And we can see here we've got a few files and the functions directory. We'll look at that here in a second. But if I go ahead and just kind of look at some of the files that the build script put in for us automatically, we'll first look at the Firebase RC, right? And that just pretty much puts in our desired Firebase project that we're ultimately going to be using, right? And additionally, looking at our Firebase JSON, you can pretty much just see where some of the files are going to be stored, some of the NPM runs, right? Some of the build scripts, whatever. Pretty straightforward. Again, nothing really happening there. And then obviously we have our git log, or I'm sorry, our git ignore. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and come over into the functions directory really quick. And here we can just see it's pretty much a standard, NPM TypeScript directory. And in the source directory is where we are going to have our initial setup for our actual functions. And don't worry, throughout the video, I'm going to be going into VS Code and everything else. I'm just kind of showing you here something in VI, right? It's just boilerplate code, nothing spectacular, and we're obviously going to be doing a lot more to this. So don't worry. But I did want to show you really just the just kind of the initial, right? Just the initial starting point from where we are, right? All we've done is Firebase init functions and went into TypeScript, selected our project, and that's pretty much about it where we are so far, okay? Okay, so when you go to actually set up your app check, you're just gonna come over to build, click on app check, kind of does its thing for a minute. And all you're gonna do is you're going to click on the get started, and it's gonna bring you into this next page. It is that simple. Okay, so once you go ahead and actually start the app check in Firebase, you're going to be brought up to the window where you actually have your web app or your web application, web hosting already set up, right? You're going to see that. And then if you click on register, you're going to see the reCAPTCHA or the reCAPTCHA Enterprise. The reCAPTCHA Enterprise, I think they give you some free stuff, but it ultimately winds up kind of being a paid thing. So we're just going to go over the reCAPTCHA. Steps here are going to be similar, but when you click on this, you're going to see that you need a reCAPTCHA secret key. Where do you get that from? Well, if you come over to the google.com reCAPTCHA page onto the admin, I'm going to leave the link in the description down below. You're going to come up to this page. Now, I already have some sites set up, but what you're going to do is you're going to click on this create, and that's going to bring you up to a page where you need to first enter a name, and you can pretty much name this whatever you want, right? So I'm just going to say demo project for YouTube, whichever. So next, you'll notice here that you have two options, the score base for version 3 and the challenge base for version 2. Definitely you want to use version 3. Version 2 is, where you have to, pick all the images that have, traffic lights in them or whatever it is, right? So go with V3. And here for your domains, back in your Firebase console, you have the domains that your app is going to go to, right? So whenever you click on one of these, it's going to open up a tab in your browser. If you have custom domains, you can add those, whichever. All I'm going to do for now is I'm going to copy both of these And what I'm going to do is in the domains, I'm going to paste in the domains from my Firebase project. And next, I'm going to actually select the correct project here. It's just the demo project. And now that I have this, what we are looking at for the domains, here you'll notice we don't have any HTTPS // or anything like that, right? Just the actual explicit domains. Now, once you have your project selected, all you need to do is go ahead and click on submit. Now, the one thing that you are going to need to take note of are going to be the keys that come up next. So let's go ahead and take a look. Now here we have our site key and we have our secret key. Make certain that you copy these at this point. You're not going to see your secret key again, and just store them both someplace where you can obviously reach them again, because you are going to need these to set all this stuff up in your actual Firebase project. So I'm just going to copy these really quick. And now that I have both of those copied over, you're pretty much good to go. You can just go back to settings, or you can go back to analytics, whichever one, and this is now going to be set up. So what we're going to do now is jump back over into our actual Firebase project. One thing here really quick, I forgot to mention, when you click on the go to analytics or go wherever, you're going to come into this board just before going back to the admin. All you need to do is just go ahead and click save, and you will come back over to your admin board, and you are all completely good to go. And you can see that we have our reCAPTCHA set up here. So with that, let's go ahead and hop back over into our actual Firebase project. Okay, now back over in our project, you can see that I have the AppCheck selected. I'm just going to go to apps. Here, I'm going to come back over and I'm going to click on under status. I have this register button. Now you'll notice over here the the 3 stacked dots. You can construct some debug tokens, but here we're not going to. That's basically, you kind of come up with a GUID. There's some temporary things you can do. We're not going to do that here. We're actually going to set up a real attestation use case, right? So we're going to go ahead and click on register. And here again, we're going to go into the reCAPTCHA. And now you can see that it's asking for our secret key, right? Not our site key, but our actual secret key. Your time to live tokens, I would recommend just keeping the default here. And what we're going to do now is actually paste in our secret key that we got from the previous configuration. And now we can go ahead and save that. Now, once we have all that saved, our AppCheck for function calling is actually configured. And you'll notice over here for the APIs, right, you can set up individual services within your Firebase. Functions are a little bit different, and that's what we're going to get into with the code of passing this information back and forth, and how you need to set up your actual hosting website code as well. So we'll get into that next. All right, so really quick, what we're going to do is just take a quick look at the actual client side to get the function calling set up. And here you can see that I'm in, pretty much just my app. It's just a TypeScript app. This is the form, right? Nothing spectacular here. Really straightforward. And ultimately, for the form to handle the on submit, I just have this handle submit function, right? All this handle input change is doing is just capturing the email and the username and everything else. Nothing really going on there. And the only thing that the handle submit is actually doing, in reference to making any use of the Firebase backend callable functions, is I have this call automation function right here. And this is going to call into a function that we're going to look at here in a second in my Firebase configuration file. But this is it from the client side. Just passes in the form data and calls the actual function. But where the actual function call is being made is from right here. Call the automation function, right? And that's the same thing we have here. Call automation function, right? And you can see here that it's expecting that object with the name and email and a message. That's it. And now we have this automation call. And this automation call is actually the pointer to the official Firebase function. And where do we get that from? Where do we get this automation call from? Right here, where we can see that we have a HTTPS callable function, right? We're not setting up any of the fetch headers. We're not setting up, direct HTTP requests. We're actually making an API call to the HTTPS callable. And this is what gives us our callable function into Firebase. And you can see it up here from our Firebase functions. We're ingesting that HTTPS callable method, okay? Now the get functions, this just allows us to get the actual object functions pointer that you can see right here is getting passed in as the first argument, right? So we need to be able to get the functions object as well as the callable method, right? And we get the functions object simply right here, get the functions, we just pass in our app. This is just your standard Firebase configuration. We get the functions, then we get a pointer to the actual function via the HTTPS callable, which comes from the Firebase functions. We pass in the functions object that we got from get functions. I'm saying functions a lot, so it might get a little confusing. And then we just pass in a string that is the name that we officially named our actual function in our server-side code, right? Now, it is important. This string right here needs to match up to the exact name of the function that you're ultimately going to be calling, okay? And then obviously, you'll have to make certain that your parameters align as well, but it's very critical that this lines up. So all we're doing so far, really hyper standard stuff, nothing really going on. We have our initialize app, initialize analytics, standard Firebase stuff, no biggie. Get functions, callable functions. Here, we're just setting up our Firebase configuration. I have a .env file. If you don't know what the .env file is or how to set up any of the Firebase stuff, go in and look at some of the other videos out on YouTube, because it is important that you understand this, because we're not going to really be going over it here. All we want to pay attention to right now is understanding that we have the functions, we get that callable function pointer, and so when our client calls call automation function, again, call automation function, pass in the appropriate parameters, and this is the official call into the Firebase, and then we get our results back, and we're going to handle that however you want, right? And that's what we're handling here with our try catch in our client, okay? So that's all that we've set up so far. Now, what we need to do on our client side as well is we also need to actually initialize our AppCheck, okay? Because right now, all we're doing is we're just calling a function. There's no real security in it at all. So this is where our attestation stuff is actually going to come into play. And here, I'm just going to paste it in. You can see that we're calling the initialize AppCheck, right, or importing it, along with, very important, our V3 of our reCAPTCHA provider. And if you recall earlier, when we set up our V3 provider, this has to match. It must match. And so it's very important here that we recognize that we are using the V3 provider. And then from there, we're just pulling in the AppCheck import, right? So this, again, it's straight from Firebase. That's it. Now, in order to actually, again, make use of this, is we have the app. We're gonna use that once again. But now what we need to do, I'm gonna copy and paste something here really quick. So here, we now are going to actually initialize our app check. Real simple call, right? We have the initialize app check here. Again, Firebase function. Then we get our app check object back, which is good. We'll look at where we're going to use that in a little bit. And then we have our provider. And again, this is our reCAPTCHA provider. And here, once again, this is where you're going to put your site key. Now, it's very important to recognize that this is the actual site key. If you recall from the reCAPTCHA, you had a site key and a secret key. You put the secret key into your Firebase console, and here on your client side, you're just simply going to put your site key. Make certain that never on your client do you ever put in your actual secret key. And here, I just simply have a another entry in my .env file that I'm just going to put in here really quick. Okay, and so now you can see that, I pretty much just have my reCAPTCHA set up. Put in the, call the initialization of the app check, put in my site key. Now this is token auto refresh enabled, set to true. You're definitely going to want to put that in there. We'll talk more about that when we get into the server side functions. But for, pretty much for the most part right now, we've got our initialization of app check configured and set up. The one thing that I'm going to do here really quick, and this is just to avoid one of the warnings, I'm just going to put in an export. So I just get rid of the warning there. That's it. So this is all that's required on your client to actually set up the app check as well as making a Firebase function call. Okay, so pretty much throughout this video, what we've been looking at, again, we looked at the web page, we looked at the reCAPTCHA, the app check, obviously, and we did go a little bit into the function setup, not too terribly much, but the functions are the area that we're really going to be diving into in the next video for part 2. So we will see you in that video where we dive into much more of putting the Firebase functions together along with the app check infrastructure of Firebase. All right, so we'll see you in the next video, everybody.